Let's see. Let's see.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Shall we start now?
Yes.
As you please. Yes.
So,
Okay. Dear Lenny, dear colleagues from RBLAC region, thank you very much for joining us in this webinar. My name is Oscar Garcia. I'm the Director of Independent Evaluation Office in New York. And I'm delighted to be with you today and share some of our thoughts on evaluation. As you are aware, the COVID-19 has disrupted the way in which we work, in which we operate, and we support countries. And we think that evaluation is paramount at these times of crisis in order to inform better decisions and approaches to help and support the countries that are working with us to respond to the crisis and to recover from the crisis. That is why in the Independent Evaluation Office, my colleagues and I have adjusted our program of work, and we have provided guidance on how to respond to evaluation during COVID-19. We have also issued some important training materials so that you could be updated into the latest way in which UNDP is undertaking monitoring and evaluation. And I want to take the opportunity to thank my colleagues, Heather Bryant, head of the Capacity Development Section, Richard Jones, who has been here spearheading this effort. And we have identified 2 new regional focal points who will be working more closely with Latin America and the Caribbean. They are Ana Guerrajo, who has recently conducted the Independent Country Program Evaluation for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean countries, and Eduardo Gomez, both of them who will be interacting with you on a more frequent basis. As you are aware, the Executive Board is constantly concerned about the quality and coverage of decentralized evaluations. We have seen that a number of them are mainly concentrated right now on the vertical funds, particularly the GEF. And that is understandable, considering that those evaluations are mandatory and that they do have the resources to undertake those evaluations. However, in our conversations with Luis Felipe and with Lenny, we were expressing also our concerns how other important areas of the work of UNDP in Latin America and the Caribbean, in particular on poverty reduction, on livelihoods, on social protection, on democratic governance, are not sufficiently covered by the decentralized evaluations. And therefore, we want to jointly address these issues and collectively identify what can be done to work better, what can be done from your side, from our side, so that we collectively inform our country offices, our country programs, by the evidence that is being provided by evaluation on what works, what does not work, and most importantly, why. What are the factors that are leading to performance? So with this, we really want to start a series of dialogues with you. And I want to thank again RBLAC and my dear friend Lenny for his openness to join us in this seminar. And I do look forward to the exchange. We will have a presentation by Richard, followed by a Q&A that hope will be a frank and constructive discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Wow, Jesus Christ, you are now really.
Right, thank you, Lenny.
What
Richard,
is
over to you.
Somebody has the microphone open while watching the TV.
I think it is only you now, Lenny. It's over to you.
Hello. 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 There was somebody was listening to something like the, how do you call it, the hearings in the parliament here. I don't know. Okay. So thanks a lot, Oscar. Thanks a lot for the words and for the introduction to to the new way we expect we will be interacting between RBLAC and the Independent Evaluation Office. Allow me to welcome all the colleagues from RBLAC and from the Independent Evaluation Office, to welcome everybody to this webinar on conducting evaluations during the COVID-19. In that sense, let me join Oscar in highlighting the fact that the current conditions with the pandemic are unprecedented, and that has forced all of us to think about innovative ways in the way we support countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, not only to provide responses to the COVID, but to provide further support to the countries and the societies in these challenging times. Travel and gatherings restrictions have affected significantly everything that we do. And that includes conducting evaluations, face-to-face, site visits, group interactions. This we also may think or might consider that could affect the quality and validity of the findings. And this is a lot of information that we need to reflect upon, to clarify how do we continue responding to the questions that Oscar put in front of us. What can be done to work better, to inform our country offices with evidence about what worked, what didn't work, and why. These are the central elements that we need to consider in the way forward. So I have to thank Oscar because he self-introduced himself, which is fantastic, but with due respect, I will certainly would like to introduce formally Oscar Garcia, Director of the Independent Evaluation Office, to all of you in the region. And with him, we also have Richard Jones, Evaluation Advisor. Richard will continue after my introductory remarks with comments on the implementation of the decentralized evaluations, which we understand will be a core aspect of the way forward. And then we will pass the floor to the Independent Evaluation Office team to manage the Q&A. At this point, I would like to emphasize, well, let me say first, recognize also the presence of a large number of colleagues from the Independent Evaluation Office, and highlight to all of you that all the network of monitoring and evaluation colleagues in our country offices for sure are involved in this effort as well. Evaluations are important. We don't need to say anymore. Program, thematic outcomes, project evaluations, etc., will help us in strengthening and addressing our weaknesses. Lessons learned are substantially important in clarifying the way forward, particularly now that we obviously understand that COVID will be with us for quite some time, and that we will need to adapt the way we work. And more importantly, the issue here is to ensure that all these efforts are conducted in a way that will be efficient, meaning that the weight of additional work, either for the Independent Evaluation Office or the country office, is addressed on time. So without further consideration, I was planning to introduce and welcome Oscar. So now I will have to welcome him, but thank him for his words. And now let me pass the floor to Richard Jones, to address the issue of decentralized evaluation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lenny. Thank you, colleagues, for joining today. Thank you, Oscar, also for your remarks. And thank you for the team in RBLAC for putting this together. Let me just share my screen. I have, I guess you can see that okay, Lenny, yes? Great. So I have two stages to my presentation, as was alluded to there. I'm going to start with just an overview of what you can do in relation to COVID-19 and evaluation within the RBLAC region. And then as a second part, we'll just have a look at project evaluation implementation last year and this year so far. And again, let's look at what we can do moving forward to address some of those implementation concerns and also maybe quality issues. Moving forward quickly. So just to give some context to the work that IEO does in the region, I'd just like to remind colleagues and thank them that, for their support in undertaking ICPEs in RBLAC. That included Argentina, El Salvador, Panama, and Uruguay last year. And this year, we are remotely evaluating the work of UNDP in Barbados, Belize, Brazil, Haiti, Honduras, and Jamaica. Now, because of COVID, unfortunately, we had to drop a number of evaluations, ICPs, in a number of regions, not just RBLAC. And in RBLAC, we had to drop Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. However, we are willing to support both financially and technically evaluations in those three countries, should they wish to do their own CPD evaluations. So those countries have been contacted, and we will support them if they wish to evaluate themselves during the 2020 or into 2021. In addition, as you know, we do a number of thematic evaluations at IEO, and there's been several in the works in recent years. The MIC was recently completed, and that had case studies from Argentina, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Panama, and Honduras. And we're also undertaking evaluations of climate change, crisis, and of course, preparing for the strategic plan, which will be presented to the board in June next year. And again, we'll be drawing from lessons from RBLAC region as well. Now, moving on to COVID. When COVID first hit us back in February, March, IEO was very quick to issue some guidance on the steps forward for evaluation. And originally, you know, underlying everything we were doing is a principle of safety first and do no harm. And that is not just moving ahead with evaluations and putting evaluators, UN staff, consultants, and of course partners at any sort of risk. Oops, sorry. We advised to rethink, reschedule plans. This was back in April. Consider refiguring evaluation teams and start collecting data remotely. Now, this is somewhat nuanced in the last few months, and we've undertaken a number of workshops and webinars with RRs and DRRs across regions to help them to undertake criticality assessments of the country office evaluation plans, then evaluability assessments of evaluations, support implementation, and then plan for future evaluations. And this is something we're going to be talking about now. So step one, criticality assessment. Obviously, we have several evaluations on our plans, and given that COVID is going to restrict our ability to implement those evaluations, it's important that we look now not just at the evaluations we have planned for 2020, but also the evaluations we have planned going into 2021, because it's likely we're going to be limited on our ability to implement evaluations over the next 18 months or 14 to 18 months. So it's essential that, actually, it was essential back in July that we looked at our evaluation plans and we made decisions on what was essential to inform our management decision-making, what could be done, what was critical. Consider at this time rescheduling those evaluations that were still needed, or combining, or looking at alternative ways of implementing our evaluations. Now, while we advise that for UNDP evaluations, for GEF evaluations, they still need to be done, though they may be delayed, and you need to discuss that with your GEF RTA. When looking at evaluation plans, we have a checklist here that you can go through when reviewing and revising your plans, and we're happy to support M&E focal points and regional focal points in this process. And that is looking at mandatory requirements from funding agencies. Can project evaluations in similar areas, such as rule of law and access to justice, can they be combined into a thematic or outcome evaluation? Is the evaluation due for completion within the next 3 months? And that's certainly in relation to any evaluations that are due, let's say, any time in 2020. If they haven't been started already, then the likelihood of them being completed this year is quite low. In several cases, we've seen plans that have midterm reviews and final evaluations that are planned very close together, 9, even 6 months together. Now, is that realistic? Are we going to learn anything new in the intervening time? And these are evaluations that you could consider either combining or delaying further. And again, is the underlining all of this is whether an evaluation is critical to the management and decision making within a country office. Sorry, just a second. The next step is then looking at those evaluations that remain and ensuring that they are in effect evaluable. There's a checklist within the 2019 evaluation guidelines to support that. The main 3 criteria is, is there a clearly defined theory of change for the project, for the evaluation? Is there a well-defined results framework that can be used for the evaluation? And is there sufficient data? That's not to say if these 3 things are not met, if these 3 criteria are not met, you cancel the evaluation. No, you should take the time to prepare, to bring these things into, to make sure these things are ready for a future evaluation. So again, looking forward 18 months, it's essential that we prepare evaluations going forward, and that these 3 areas are in place to support evaluations. That's doubly important during COVID, because the likelihood is we'll be undertaking our evaluations remotely. And we have found in our own ICPEs that when these pieces of the puzzle are not in place, it makes a remote evaluation considerably more difficult than an evaluation that's undertaken in the field. Now, when it comes to implementation, things are changing, things are opening a little bit more, but also quite quickly closing again, as we've seen in the UK and parts of the US. So we need to consider how we undertake our evaluations. Of course, underlining this again is safety and doing no harm. 3 or 4 questions there that will drive our decision making. We may need to use national consultants in the field if it's safe to do so. This can be undertaken with support from international consultants. Desk reviews, more detailed desk reviews could be the basis for our evaluations. We ourselves are using Zoom and Skype, interviews with not only UNDP staff, but also stakeholders and partners. And that works, but it does require a somewhat different modality. You may need more time, not less time, because you may find that people are less available as they are at home, and so you need to be flexible in your timing. Terms of reference for our evaluations need to reflect this new modality and the fact that there may be restrictions that are beyond the control of evaluators. And of course, remote data collection and use of secondary data might be essential to implement our evaluations. Now, planning ahead and going back to our as mentioned, our evaluability assessment, you know, we need to capture these lessons from COVID, from project implementation, program implementation. We need an ongoing real-time reflection to ensure our future responses are built on lessons learned from COVID. To some degree, you know, we can learn from our past crisis, but I do wonder as well if we are learning from this current crisis to inform our future programming to support countries. Monitoring and evaluation needs to be planned, especially for new and reprogrammed funds. We need to be capturing data. And of course, especially for reprogrammed or reprocessed funds, we need to document the decision making. We need to ensure our terms of reference, our theories of change for this reprogramming is articulated. And of course, we need to adjust our results targets to support any future evaluations, and also the programming. Now, way back in April, we issued some guidance, and actually, Lenny, we did a workshop with your M&E focal points back in March based on the guidance, which touched on based on the evaluation guidance, but also touched on this COVID-19 guidance. Just to let you know, that was reissued in June and updated, and was recently translated also into Spanish and French. So really, there's a good body of work. We are also very responsive to any demand you might have. So if there's a gap in this or you're unclear, please, we have Anna and Eduardo as focal points, and also myself and Heather, who are happy to directly address these concerns and develop guidance more broadly if needed. As you know, we've also, within our own office, we've developed now 7 lessons learned pieces looking back at previous crisis, and developing sort of short thematic pieces to try and help country officers and program staff to sort of learn from what has happened previously as well. And we have 3 more pieces coming out before the end of the year. Now, moving on quickly, let me have a glass of water. I just want to reflect on where we were and what our plans look like in RBLAC. So it's not unique to RBLAC that we, as an organization, we overplan and we somewhat underdeliver. UNDP normally plans well over 500 evaluations a year, and it delivers around 300, around 55%. In RBLAC last year, there was a plan of around 100, and only 44% was delivered. 45 evaluations were delivered. And of those 45, so 20 of those 45 evaluations were GEF terminal evaluations and midterm reviews, which effectively means for the whole of RBLAC, there were 25 project and program evaluations covering quite a considerable portfolio. Looking at this year, just to reflect, this is how that broke down across the different country offices. And just looking at the figures, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 country officers who did no evaluations, and 6 who only did 1. And that's so 58% of officers either did nothing or only 1 evaluation, which is an average of 1.7 evaluate. Sorry to bore you with figures. It's 1.7 per country office. The average for the whole of UNDP is about 2.5 evaluations per year. Looking at this year's figures, as I said, we have 77 for the region planned. So far, 22 have been completed. Only 10 evaluations are overdue. This is actually, yes, COVID, but actually this is the same picture we saw last year at this time for both UNDP and RBLAC. It means that between now and the end of the year, we have 55 evaluations, or 72% of our evaluations are still to be completed by the end of the year. And as I said earlier, if those evaluations haven't started, or the terms of reference, or you haven't recruited the teams, the likelihood of those being completed by the end of the year are very small. And that means we're not capturing results for the year, and we're not informing our management decisions through the evaluations that we undertake. Looking at quality, as you know, every year in our annual report and evaluation, we report on the quality of evaluations. We undertake a QA of most of the evaluations undertaken, a quality assessment. For the organization as a whole, around 21% meets the guidance, the quality standards as set out in our guidance. 54% are a little below or quite considerably below, and about 20% are, for want of a better word, unsatisfactory or not credible and not useful. In RBLAC, the situation is somewhat lower, only 16% in recent years, an average of around 16–17% in recent years meet the organization's standards, and more than 28% are not at all satisfactory. And this, of course, means we're both wasting money and we're not capturing results, and we're not effectively informing our management decision and program work. On this slide is an overview of average quality assessment scores for decentralized evaluations by country. And you see there's only a handful of blues, that is satisfactory, and most hover around the moderately satisfactory. And that's for your information. Now, that's not to say that there's not things we can do quickly to address those quality concerns. The 2019 evaluation guidance had templates, or has templates, checklists for terms of reference and section reports and evaluation and draft evaluation reports. We find that most evaluations that fall below the standard quality or the acceptable quality levels, it's due to the fact that they don't follow these templates. Equally, one of the areas where we struggle to deliver on is cross-cutting issues, especially the inclusion of gender and vulnerable groups in our evaluations. And again, we have more detailed guidance on that within the evaluation. We have more detailed guidance within the evaluation guidance on how you can improve that and what should be included. GEF evaluations have shown a little bit of a decline, and given that 44% of your evaluations are GEF, you should look at what can be done to make them stronger. And GEF has recently released more detailed terminal evaluation guidance, which should help you to improve the quality. Of course, a further issue is access to good evaluators. We have just issued a guidance note on how you can use the ERC and the quality assessment rating to identify good evaluations within the Evaluation Resource Center. We urge you to use that. And also, when you are hiring, check the Evaluation Resource Center for the quality of evaluators' past work. And also reach out to colleagues who have used those evaluators. Equally, we found unsurprisingly, a direct correlation between budgets for evaluations and the quality, because often a lower budget means less days or a cheaper evaluator, and cheaper evaluators don't often bring, they may appear good value for money, but they often don't bring the results that we require or we want. Now, just as an example, our analysis shows if you want to reach a satisfactory quality for your evaluations, then an average budget of around $37,000 is needed. For moderately, it's around $30,000. In RBLAC, the average budget for evaluations is $25,000. So already we're budgeting lower than we should, and as a result, we are getting fewer days for our evaluators, and as a result, probably less, there's a correlation between the quality of the evaluation that's coming out, the usability, and therefore the credibility, and the budget that's being assigned. So that brings me to the end. Now, underlying that, we as I say, we have a lot of support out there. We have guidance, and we're willing to work with you closely. And in addition, in June, we just launched an online training, 2 online trainings. One is a basic introduction to evaluation, which touches on the guidance and what is needed and what is required when implementing evaluations, and a second, which is a more detailed 3 to 4 hour course, which is mandatory for all M&E focal points. So all M&E focal points in your country offices in the RBLAC region and globally should have done this by the 1st of October. They haven't, but they should now be aiming to complete this by the end of the year. And this covers everything they need to know for managing an evaluation and ensuring, therefore, we will get the quality that we require. Within RBLAC, globally, about 420 people have completed both courses. Within RBLAC, 62 people have completed, 26 have completed the certified course, and 36 have completed the introduction. And I can let Gonzalo know who they are, so he can thank them, and also maybe he can chase up with those who have not completed. Thank you. That brings me to the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions from you, Lenny, and your team.
Thank you very much, Richard. Highly appreciated. I think the specificities about how to operate during COVID is something very important. How to improve decentralized evaluations is also very important. And the need to improve our own qualifications, competencies, and experience on managing evaluation processes is also extremely important. So I'm very happy that all the team from our country offices that deal with the monitoring and evaluation processes are here with us. I definitely, now that you mentioned Gonzalo, I would like to use the opportunity to highlight to all your colleagues in the evaluation office that the focal point for monitoring and evaluation and for programming purposes in RBLAC is our colleague Gonzalo Guerra, that certainly everybody knows. And in addition to that, he is the facilitator, moderator, and activator of the regional network of monitoring and evaluation focal points. So I feel like we are speaking in a community of practice meeting. I personally will have a couple of comments later on, but to avoid creating a bias in the discussion, I will prefer that you go ahead with and take comments and suggestions. Colleagues, you can raise your hands, you can shout calling for attention, or you can obviously also raise your hand or make questions in the chat, and we will be supporting Richard in addressing that part of the story. I am sure your team, Richard and Gonzalo, will help in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, if you'd like to raise your hand. Sasha, you had a question. Would you like to start with that question? Sasha Lindo.
Sure. Just
Thank
a quick
you.
one. Thank you for the presentation. It was very useful. Just a quick one from the Barbados office for my benefit in terms of the QA guidance. Just checking where we could find, where I could find a key guideline document for QAs.
Okay, that's so we issued the guidance last year. It's in section 6 of the new UNDP evaluation guidance. One of my colleagues will put the link into the chat now. So what we recommend is you have, and just to take a step further, so that has everything we expect to see within your evaluations. We recommend that you share with evaluators both The draft, well, you can share the whole of the guidance, including the draft overview for the draft outline for the evaluation report, and also please give them the quality assessment and warn them that they will their work will be quality assessed against that QA score, and that they should be ensuring that all of the points there are of the highest standards.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sasha.
If you'll allow me to make a
Please, Gonzalo.
Richard. Hello, everyone. I was quietly listening, so I didn't want to intervene too much. But in this point, I want to highlight to everyone, one of those things that Richard said is a decline on the quality of GEF evaluations. The majority of our evaluations are GEF because they're mandated, XYZ, those are the ones we end up doing the most. There's a bit of a discussion often on increasing the diversity of the evaluations that we have, you know, not just GEF evaluations, but our own programs and projects evaluations as well. My point here is GEF evaluations are not exclusively for the GEF colleagues. They are in our site. They have to meet the quality assessment standards. And so therefore, feel free to review them critically. It is not just for the environmental expert to write and to the program officer to pass them along. The terms of reference doesn't need to be done correctly. So I've seen a couple of issues with some of those terms of references, even though it's a template that you just basically fill in a few gaps. But those few gaps, in many cases, are empty. And so, for example, the questions for the evaluations. So we can chat about this a little bit more in detail, colleagues. But in my personal point of view is, if you have good terms of references, you will end up having a good evaluation. So that has been a lot of my emphasis when working with you in reviewing and drafting terms of references. You're not obligated to send them to me, but I do strongly encourage you to work with me and find out or review terms of references that we get them correctly. Again, back on the GEF evaluations is not just for the program officer, get it done, we forget about it. There is a quality assessment and we can review it and we should review them. Thanks.
Margarita Aguiles is here with us, and she's just reminded us that the terminal evaluation guidance for GEF is being translated into Spanish and should be out soon. And she might want to talk to that. I'd just like to say, as part of the QA process as well, that we do a validation of the rating of the project in the GEF evaluation. So the rating that is done by the evaluator, we look at all the PIMS reports, the midterm review, and we check whether that rating is actually adequate or does truly reflect the implementation of the project. And more often than not, we downgrade. We find that evaluators are somewhat generous sometimes, and that the evidence suggests that a lower rating score. And that is then submitted through to the funding agency as a reflection of the implementation of those GEF projects. So it's important that we get those GEF evaluations right. Otherwise, they will be adjusted, and the message back to GEF will be adjusted and corrected, if you like. Margarita, do you have any? Would you like to say anything while you're here?
Yes, thanks, Richard. So further to Gonzalo's point about the TORs, the TORs have also been translated into Spanish as part of the translation of the entire guidance document. So I received the translation just a few days ago. So the guidance and the translated TORs will be posted shortly, and I will make an announcement on those once they are online. And then regarding your point, Richard, about the validated ratings, yes, we do see that overall, not just in the LAC region, but overall, most of the performance ratings are downgraded by the IEO's QA reviewers. So this signals that the ratings are not realistic. There is not sufficient evidence to support the ratings. So when you're doing your reviews of these reports, so please look at that. and see if there is indeed evidence to support the ratings that are given. Those are my 2 points. Thank you. Over.
We have a question from Ruben about the ICP, the cancellation of the ICPE. Rather than answer that here, Ruben, I think we should have a discussion between maybe Heather and myself and the ICPE team. I understand, so the support that we are giving, sorry, so maybe you can ask the question actually, Ruben, rather than me reading it out. Are you there? Would you be willing to ask the question?
Thank you, Richard. Yes, I'm pleased to ask the question. It regards the following. Yes, we know that our country office was listed for ICP this year, but it's no longer going to take place, as we have heard earlier this year. But I'm happy to hear from during a presentation that there are funding and technical support available if country office will decide to proceed with a decentralized evaluation. And in fact, we wanted to proceed with country program evaluation. But as we have not budgeted in our IWP for this year, for 2020, we don't have matching funds, because I understand you have to have matching funds, even though the independent evaluation office will provide financial support. And that's why my question, will the resources be available? Will it roll over to the beginning of next year? If that's the case, we can budget in our IWP of 2021 to make sure that we have matching funds available. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruben. Heather, would you like to come in? Can I put you on the spot?
Sure. Thanks, Richard, and thank you, Ruben, for your question. Our office had a number of exchanges with RBLAC at the central level on these questions in relation to these countries in August and September, where we had indicated that we had resources available to support in 2020, so that the exercises would need to be carried out in 2020. But if you would like to perhaps come back to us through an email or a separate conversation, we could maybe discuss this further.
And colleagues from Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, please, if you would like to do that, we need to have that conversation as early as possible to start the process. Andrea?
If you allow me, Richard.
Please go ahead, Lenny. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry for that. I think, in this very fluid conversation, I would like to raise my hands and be careful and call for a bit of caution. RBLAC systematically have been, during the last 2, 3, 4 years, making a point to everybody corporately that October, November, and December are fundamentally months for the country offices to focus on delivery. That obviously opens the space for country offices to also have audits or evaluations or other type of activities if they have planned correctly. All right. What is important is to keep a balance, that any offer to do things during the period October, November, December will have to be managed in a good balance, so that that doesn't take resources from country offices to other purposes at a time that is very important to ensure that the office resources are meant for delivery. So not to say that we shouldn't do it, but we shall make sure that everybody agrees, is clear of the challenges, and on top of everything, that the country office management is in full support. So thank you.
Thanks, Lenny. No, we fully support that, and we recognize, we rarely plan anything in these months, because we recognize that you are busy with disbursement, and also you have the RAW and other planning exercises going on. And we would have liked to have done this earlier, but schedules did not allow. But that does bring us back now also to the issue of the fact that we have 72% of evaluations that still have not been completed within the region. And so, you know, these reflections should have been done early so that those evaluations could have either been started or planned for after this key time. So this brings us back to the messages we tried to send in July and August, is that a review of the evaluation plans early rather than later is obviously going to benefit us all when it comes to implementing, especially during October, November, December. Yeah.
I will be positive in the sense that we shall acknowledge that we are in a totally unusual year.
Yeah.
That we have been overwhelmed by a wave, a tsunami of unexpected situations. And certainly, even I myself, I am surprised with the level of activity and the level of positive results. I mean, to the point that at this moment, practically we are at close to 100% delivery in the Bureau. And I'm very surprised that we have been able to do all of this while, you know, everybody has been locked down. So, the fact that evaluations are still pending is something that we should take care for the next pandemic.
Yeah. No, and that's not to say that, you know, as I mentioned, 140 evaluations have been completed, and I'm very surprised that they've managed to be done. And as mentioned, we're actually at the similar levels for implementation as last year. Nothing has really changed. So it's a good, you know, we should actually, I'm pleasantly surprised, but I always want more. So unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Andrea, sorry to keep you. You have a question.
Thank you, Richard, Lenny, colleagues. Good morning from Guyana. I just have a question and an observation on the cross-cutting issues, because I think indeed this really poses a challenge for us. And I'm wondering if part of it might be how our projects were designed in the first place. So for example, with gender, we're really trying to increase the gender ratings and pay more attention to the gender disaggregated indicators, etc. But I'm wondering if this is not done initially, if that now poses a problem when you come to evaluate the project against the gender indicators. Certainly at the end, you may be able, or you should be able to acquire and track some amount of gender indicators, depending on what the project is like. But if you really didn't focus on this in the design phase, could this be one of the areas and the reasons why we do have that challenge? And then secondly, in terms of the IPC evaluation, this is an area that we would like to have further discussion on with Gonzalo and your team at some point. Thanks very much.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'm going to hand over to Heather, who actually has worked a lot more on gender within evaluation than I have. But it comes from the point we rarely plan our evaluations when we design our projects. And we should be designing both of them together. And then when we come, then we will design our project somewhat differently, and we will design our monitoring somewhat differently. And when we come to evaluate, we will be ready to evaluate those aspects. For gender, what we find is, no, you're absolutely right there. We don't integrate gender as well as we should as an organization, and time again, evaluation and our own reflection is showing that. But also, we don't guide evaluators on how to evaluate gender when they evaluate our projects. We say, please evaluate gender. We don't then give them any tips or highlights or where they should be looking and what activities they should be looking at. So we find that it's not surprising that evaluators get lost when they are evaluating that aspect sometimes. But Heather, you will.
Thanks, Richard. First of all, I mean, partially agree with what Richard has said, but the guidance does provide a number of indications on how gender can be integrated into the terms of reference of an evaluation. There is a recommendation wherever possible to include a gender specialist in the team, or ensure that your evaluators selected have some expertise in gender, because the quality assessment ratings relating to the cross-cutting issues, notably gender, are whether or not the evaluation has addressed gender. So you could have a project that hasn't done very well on gender, but you could have an evaluation that has very thoroughly looked at the gender aspects throughout and come up with conclusions and recommendations. Similarly, you could have a project that has actually done a lot to contribute to gender equality and women's empowerment, but then end up with an evaluator who ignores that aspect. And so you get a low QA rating for the gender questions because the evaluation doesn't cover the issue. So there are two elements which can be related, as Richard said, but one is the project's approach to gender and the other is the evaluator's approach. So I would argue that if you've got the right evaluator, you can get a good score on the QA rating, even if the project is rated negatively with respect to gender in the evaluation.
Thank you. Heather?
To comment on.
Go on, yes, of course, Gonzalo.
Here quickly. I just want to add on to Heather's comment, which is absolutely on the nail on this point, in which the quality assessment of the evaluation is about how the evaluation is conducted. It does not say whether the project itself is of high quality or low quality. It doesn't rate the quality of the project or the results for that matter, if we want to talk about that. But colleagues, so the quality assessments that Richard and Heather are talking about is about how good the evaluation is. Is it credible? Does it have evidence? Are the recommendations able to be implemented? Are they implementable? Is the information triangulated? All these issues that we're talking about, and in this particular question was about, well, did it incorporate gender well enough? Did we ask the proper questions about gender? And then obviously the answer is the other part of it that all of us are more focused on, of course, and our management is focused on did we actually cover gender? How well did we cover it? And we want to say, yes, we did. But the quality assessment for the evaluations look at whether the evidence and the methodology is appropriate. Thanks.
Thanks, Gonzalo. Leopold, you had a question or a statement, mixture of both, but I think it's important. Would you like to ask it?
Thank you, Richard, for the presentation. I think it was very clear and useful. My point is, I think regarding the QA slide, where we highlight the key factor that we are taking into account when we are making the QA assessment. I think in support to a good term of references, there are very important steps when it comes to implement the evaluation. I'm thinking about the validation of the inception report, the briefing and debriefing meetings. And I think when we have a good involvement of the strategic level, it can really have a good impact on the quality and the usefulness of the evaluation. So I was asking if the quality assessment process take into account those aspects, and or can we can encourage those good practices when we make sure that at the implementation of the evaluation we have involvement of the strategic level, not only at UNDP but also at the conference as well.
Thank you, Leopold. No, you're absolutely right. We underline the usefulness and the essential nature of Following up in terms of reference with an inception report, because an inception report basically underlines the evaluator's understanding of the assignment and is again an agreement between you and the evaluator on the next steps forward. And of course, briefing and debriefing is highly important. They're not included in the QA, but they are included in the guidance. And there's a section, there's even a draft outline of an inception report, and also some process mapping that includes those briefings and debriefings.
Can I, hello?
Hello, yes, yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Leopold.
Yeah, sure. We have them in the guidance, but what I was trying to say is that, sure, we can have a very good term of reference, and we are an evaluator, okay? But if we don't make sure that at those steps we have the strategic level in the process, we can have a result that is not at the level of the term of reference.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And
no, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
I think about the situation where we have the project is more involved at the implementation process than the strategic level. At this time, I think we don't have the outcome that we are expecting in the process. Thank you.
No, exactly. And especially we should link these evaluations of projects through to outcome. You know, they shouldn't be just undertaken on their own, outcome, and then through to CPD, but also in consideration of sort of bigger issues such as cooperation framework and also the strategic plan. And should be linked through to project level evaluations. Louis?
Thank you. Hi, colleagues. Hello from
Hey,
the Mexico office. Thank you, Richard, for that presentation. More than a question, I think I was thinking for a recommendation. You mentioned at some point the average cost of moderately good or good evaluations, and I think that is something that worries me, because it's quite true that the present conditions have severely limited the resources that we have available for spending in good evaluations, and perhaps greatly impacting the quality. I don't know. So I guess I would like to know if there are any recommendations on your part for us to do the best we can with what we have in terms of resources. Thank you.
So yes, I'm not advocating spending less on evaluations. You know, budgeting is a big constraint. Well, I feel somewhat that we constrain ourselves when we budget, right? We don't plan for our evaluations properly. We don't plan early, and often we plan late, and as a result, we take the budget that we are allocated for an evaluation. Rather than saying, you know, early on, we want to do this evaluation, we want to cover this, which will take X amount of days and travel, and then planning within the project budget cycle, ensuring that there is funding there for those. But it means starting early. It means almost ensuring that, in fact, from the project outset or the program outset, that we are ensuring that there is funding available. Different regions have different approaches as well. They often take 1% for monitoring and evaluation, 5% for monitoring and evaluation from project spending, but we rarely see that funding actually any funding remaining for evaluation. It often funds field visits for monitoring, and then when we come to plan the evaluation, often late in the process, we find that the cupboard is bare and there are no funds remaining. I mean, certainly the problem we see some very low budgets, some very unrealistic budgets for evaluations. You know, under $5,000 is not unusual. even using local consultants in certain countries, that's not going to give you very much return for your money, and certainly isn't going to help you inform your management decision making. You're not going to be capturing results and designing projects based on the results of a $5,000 evaluation. Now, what can you do? If you're fund constrained across a number of projects, and because you haven't designed the process early, again, why not pool this funds and produce maybe a thematic or an outcome evaluation? Maybe there's a project that does have funds that isn't being evaluated, but maybe you can bring that into the thematic or outcome evaluation, and they can part fund the process. Gonzalo?
Yes, actually, those are the points I wanted to raise as well. On thinking of, in many of our country offices, we have smaller projects, and so even if you apply a percentage of them, they may not come up with the amount needed or that is considered appropriate for an evaluation. So pooling them for a thematic. Also think about a portfolio approach, which is in this particular context is similar to a thematic. I'm equating them. So if you're looking at of doing a particular question that covers several projects or several results, by the way, those are valid. Panama did a recent one a couple of years ago on gender, which was actually worked pretty well. Before I see Fabiola has her hand up, but I wanted to comment one quick thing on the budgets and the funding of them. I want to tie into two issues, colleagues, here. It is on the mandatory evaluations, a reminder on the mandatory types of evaluations that the new evaluation guidance has. Now, it has thresholds that says, okay, if you have a project for more than $4 million, you have to have a certain type of evaluation. I'm not going to go through all the details. I'm going to ask Richard to do that. But the key aspect here is we need to tie that into the development process of the project and consider or include that budget there in the development of the project. That's what that requirement is signaling us to do, to make sure that this part is in there. So it's not a matter of like after the project is implemented and 2 years down, 3 years down the line, we're like, oh, well, okay, we're mandated, or these things are mandatory, but we never budgeted them. So we want to avoid that. And so you as M&E focal points and you as program officers in your country offices, recall that when you're drafting the project budgets, at the drafting moment, check to see if what type of evaluation is mandatory, if at all, and make sure you include that in your budget so you don't find yourself in this conundrum later on. So I just wanted to touch on that. Richard, you probably know it off the top of your head. What are those thresholds?
I shall tell you in a second. I'm just going to go over to Heather while I look for it and remind myself.
Well, you're looking for that without in any way intending to negate what Richard and Gonzalo have said about all of those things you should put into place and needing at least a minimum budget for an evaluation. Another thing you can do, which we should be doing in all cases, but I think it's even more critical if you can't afford to give your evaluator as many days as would be ideal, is to really prepare as much as you can for your evaluator. And there are some hints in this in some of the guidelines, the COVID guidance that we developed this summer and with the translations available. And this is make sure you have all of the documentation. If it's a project evaluation, that's probably the easiest example, that you have all of the documentation available. If there wasn't a theory of change, have the program team already articulate the way they see the theory of change. Have the teams actually write up some notes on key elements of the project. The more you can give to the evaluator at the outset of the assignment in a clear, structured manner, the less time your evaluator is going to spend just trying to understand what the project is about. if you can give them a head start so that then the evaluator can really plunge into the heart of the matter and really ask very good questions in the interviews that she or he is carrying out and this kind of thing, that will at least help the whole process. And like I said, we should do that in any case, but especially if you're facing constraints, really put as many cards as you can into the evaluator's hand at the outset.
And as we mentioned, that's essential during COVID, especially where we are relying heavily on desk reviews and you know, Zoom and Zoom interviews. It's best that we give them everything, rather than them having to hunt through and waste time looking and asking for stuff. Fabiola, you have a question. You've been patiently waiting with your hand up. Would you like to ask?
Thank you very much for the presentation and excellent discussion. Please, which are your recommendations for us as focal points, especially in this current context, that we should reinforce in our country offices as technical capacities to improve and ensure the quality of evaluations, but considering that the process, including the monitoring process, because if monitoring is high, we have high quality, since the monitoring, we can contribute more in the evaluation quality. Which are your recommendations?
It's a good question. So we're aware that often the evaluation manager is not you, the M&E focal point. So for a start, we obviously have the detailed guidance, which is not just for you, it's for the whole organization. And within there, we have templates for terms of reference, inception reports, and evaluation reports. Now, if you can get involved in the planning process early and you can share those with the project managers and the essential evaluation managers, those are the key sort of evaluation tools that you have to ensure the quality. Obviously, we have the training that we've just mentioned. We have a shorter training, which is on an introduction, which takes about an hour and a half. We have a longer certified training, which is 3 hours. Again, they have all the competencies we expect, especially for managing decentralized evaluations and expectations. And within your office, you can share those, the links to those. They're on the LMS, and encourage your colleagues to do those courses as well. They're not just for you as M&E focal points, they're for the whole of the organization, because we're aware that the whole of the organization is involved in planning and implementing evaluation, not just, and evaluations inform everything we do. Now, then beyond, it's of course, as we've been saying, when an evaluator, and we face this a lot, when we do our evaluations, we spend so much time looking for information, looking for monitoring information, looking for reports, looking even simple things like annual reports and annual work plans being in one place for projects. Very simple. We spend a lot of time hunting those documents down so that we can have the information we need to make the judgments that we make as evaluators. So quite simply, if project managers and project officers can document their projects within a central place, keep and store standardized monitoring data, because again, this is an issue that different projects take different approaches on monitoring. They have different levels of quality, different levels of disaggregation, then it makes it very difficult then to bring that monitoring data together to again make a judgment based of the impact of evaluations. So this again is one place you can work with your colleagues to try and address that sort of knowledge management storing aspect of data and information and documentation. I'm not sure if I've answered your question very well, but does that help?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Richard.
Colleagues, Gonzalo, Heather, even Anna and Eduardo, would you like to give any further? No? Okay. Okay, thank you. I shall remember that. Lenny would like to just come in with a couple of questions. Lenny, would you like to take?
Yeah, and well, first of all, thank you very much, because it seems like the session is very active, very substantive, and we are beyond the hour we had. I have no problem in continuing here together with you, and I'm very thankful to everybody for being here. So let me start with that. The second point, I think, is I would like to bring, perhaps there's no answer to what I'm going to say, but I want to bring an issue, because it seems like everything is well designed, put in clear, boxes, and you just need, the boxes to be filled in, and then you have an output that provides a fantastic and very useful evaluation. I know that's not the intention. I know we all know how difficult it is to conduct evaluations, but I would like to highlight a couple of things just for reflection. First, I think I'm very happy that despite COVID conditions, most of the evaluations are going on and possibly will be finished, many of them on time. Having said that, I would like to emphasize that from where I sit, it looks like 2021 will be very similar to 2020 in terms of conditions of travel, this availability of planes, openness of borders by governments, etc., etc. So I think playing on what Richard and Heather are advocating for, which is early planning. It is essentially important to think. If things happen and things improve, fantastic, but it's important to start planning right now, as mentioned by Richard, on the project, with the project managers, etc., with the ARRs, with the DRRs, etc. What will happen next year? Because most probably all the evaluations will continue to be distant evaluations. So many people wouldn't like to say what I'm saying, but I am saying it. I don't have any evidence that the situation in 2021 will change. So if we want to meet expectations from our governments, when I say our governments, I'm speaking about mainly those who finance us, even through other multilateral organizations like GEF. We need to take this into consideration. That's point number one. Second point is that even we should be very careful, because I understood that maybe that was not the intention, but that's the way I heard it. Because we cannot travel from New York and from the hubs, we will hire national consultants. For me, that sounds also like a challenging exercise, given the conditions in many countries. I mean, national consultants won't be able to perform their job because simply the ministries are not working, correct? Or they cannot travel within the country. So also, therefore, and arranging virtual missions is very time consuming. I'm saying it because we are going through this for different purposes. Right now, we are organizing virtual meetings. And it's very difficult. At times, even it's complicated because the government officials or the NGOs, etc., they don't even have access to reliable online. So we need to facilitate them going into certain places where then we have to take care of the COVID prevention effort. So it's challenging. That's on a very operational perspective. Willing and hoping that by considering these issues, we can continue addressing the key questions that Oscar made at the beginning. What is it that we have to better inform our country offices by evidence about what works, what doesn't. But I will even go further. It's not about informing our country offices. At the end of the day, evaluations are substantially important for our country offices to carry on our business. But they are fundamentally important for our governments. When I say governments, I insist, I'm speaking about those who fund what we do. And there are two types of governments. There are the governments from the north, or those that we usually consider the donor countries, and we have the donors from the south. In Latin America, that will be program countries. That is, the countries from the region that take money from their own pocket to ask us to do things for them. Correct? So, and I'm saying, I'm putting this in this context because Latin America is a region of government co-sharing. And I want to raise this issue with a lot of attention, because the focus of evaluation, the angle of evaluation, the way you identify evaluation issues, and even the way you address evaluation issues is very different. If you think that you are writing for a donor, or if you think that you are writing for a government co-sharing government. So, of course, at the end of the day, the substance, the core of the evaluation should be the same. But we need to keep this in mind. And I'm saying this because evaluations are not objective as they pretend to be. Irrespective of whatever you can say, they always have ways of being interpreted, and there are ways of being communicated, and there are ways that people will take them. And since this, not all, but many of these evaluations have, you know, political implications, it's important to think carefully before we organize this information for public consumption and for advocacy of the things that we would like to advocate. I'm very careful on this because I'm not saying we should censor the, I'm making this point. I'm not saying we should censor the evaluation process. I'm saying we need to be mindful that we need to keep a good and engaging relationship with a lot of actors. And there's nothing like an objective evaluation that only responds to the truth, the one truth that exists in the world. So we can always achieve common objectives through different means, and that's very important. I think also we need to I would like to highlight 2 or 3 things. In the UN, in the United Nations Secretariat, at the General Assembly, today, the last year, the year before, the last 5 years, there are 2 or 3 concepts that are essential. The Agenda 2030 is universal. Second, UNDP is not an agency of least developed countries. On the contrary, in the General Assembly, there is a lot of attention to middle-income countries. In the executive board, there is a lot of attention to middle-income countries. So we need to ensure that we put these elements into our framework and ensure that we get out of the evaluations, of the current evaluations, elements that support the pledge that many countries in the General Assembly, in our executive board, are making to ensure that we keep attention to the situation of poverty that many citizens experience in middle-income countries, in high middle-income countries. There is a third position, which is a fundamental call for universal presence. In that, I would like to say, seats are making a very strong point in all fora. And this is, again, this is politics, correct? This is what our bosses, let's remember that the member states are our bosses, this is what our bosses are requesting from us. So we also need to adapt to that. And finally, it's a very important element, which is we are doing development. I mean, we are supporting governments in making development. So there is a great deal of uncertainty involved in how do you development, in how development progresses, etc., etc. So I'm finalizing my point with this issue of uncertainty because the chart that Richard showed about, satisfactory evaluation, unsatisfactory evaluations, etc., etc., is a good proxy to identify how we're doing things. But it's impossible to do development as if we are doing, a precise eye surgery with laser instruments, correct? And I'm making this point fundamentally to bring a bit of tranquility to colleagues in the country offices, because obviously many of the things that we are trying to do is to try to achieve higher standards, but to achieve higher standards in conditions of implementation that are not of countries where everything works perfect. So we need to balance that thing. So we need to be very proud of the work we are doing. We need to be very demanding with ourselves in, as Richard said, to try to achieve more and to achieve as much as possible. But we need to balance things as well, correct? Because there's no way we can manage results or public policies in any country. And the pandemic have shown that even developed countries are not coping correctly with the challenges of the day. And so there's a lot of transformation going on. And I believe for many of you don't know, I mean, Richard and I worked together many years ago in a country office, and evaluation is part of the DNA of many of the people that used to work in the past. Evaluation, to be certified as an evaluator in the past, you needed 2 weeks session. Nobody would get certified with a 3-hour online course, 15, 20 years ago. Of course, information have moved on, etc., etc. What I want to say is that we all believe in evaluation, but we need to make sure that evaluations are useful. If we take evaluation processes as simply the preparation of a report and sticking the note, and we don't make sure that they are available to our governments, and I insist to our governments that provide the funding. In Latin America, the evaluations are not for the evaluation office, the evaluations are for the government. We need to produce them and share them with the government and with everybody that will benefit from them. So with that, thank you, Richard. I really appreciate this opportunity to share these things. Well, not only with colleagues in the country offices, but with your colleagues in the evaluation office. And let me finalize by saying that we really appreciate the way things have been moving in the recent couple of years in coordinating better, these approaches about what is it that doing evaluations in Latin America and the Caribbean means from the perspective of the issues that I just raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Lenny. I don't think I'm going to come back on your points, though I might disagree with some of them. Maybe that's a discussion over coffee. We, over the last few years, have not made an attempt to make evaluation a prescriptive process. What we are trying to do is put in pieces of a puzzle to help country officers to do better evaluations that are usable and credible and that inform your management decision making. So each step is a piece, and we are responsive and reactive to those needs of country officers. Nothing we have done over the last 2 years has been developed with our perspective solely. They have all been developed through a process that has reflected on the needs that have been given to us from country officers. And we remain reactive and demand driven. So if there are more pieces you need or less, we are happy to act accordingly. But there is still a minimum standard, and you know, annually the UN does 300 evaluations, of which 25% is not very good, which equates to over $2.5 million. So in crude financial terms, we need to be a little bit careful of how we do spend our money, or as you say, not our money, donor money, and equally government partners' money. So I think, and just reflecting on that, I think whatever government we're responding to, they want to know how well we are doing our work, and evaluation tells them this. So we need to ensure that we're giving due diligence to the quality of those reports that we give on then to country officers, to governments, and so on. So that's it's always a pleasure to discuss things with you, Lenny, either here or over coffee, and I hope we have more chance to do that. So this has been, just to bring things to an end, Gonzalo, this has been very useful for us, because again, your questions, they help us to design guidance in the future as well, because clearly if there are things that are coming through from you, then we can adjust the guidance accordingly to ensure they're clearer, and also maybe put out shorter pieces to support you. Just to let you know, we're happy also to do this again, maybe on a less formal basis, without Lenny and Oscar. So we can have a more of an ask us any, you know, people might feel, I'm sure you wouldn't, but people might feel, but we can work together, Gonzalo, on finding a time and maybe just a coffee with people in the next couple of months, and introduce Eduardo and Anna.
A virtual coffee.
Coffee. A virtual coffee. Absolutely. So if nobody has any further questions, that's been an amazing session, an hour and a half, very useful. I hope you have found it useful. And please, if you have any further questions, our inbox is open, and please send them to us. Thank you very much, Lenny. And
colleagues, and thank you, Richard and Heather and colleagues. Hope to keep working with all of you. Bye-bye. And colleagues, we'll see you around. We'll touch base again. Bye.
Thank you, Lenny.
Great discussion.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
You all.